All right, so Kanye West, right. Lots of headlines, lots of questions. Let's deep dive into this YouTube commentary video breaking down the recent reports and try to make sense of it all.
Yeah, it's really something, isn't it? So many layers to this story. We definitely need to be careful, look at things with a critical eye. I mean, how much is fact and how much is just speculation?
For sure, for
Yep.
sure. We've got some pretty wild claims here, like this whole thing about nitrous oxide use, and
Yeah.
then of course his relationship with Bianca Censori.
Right.
And then underlying all of this, questions about Kanye's mental health, his decision making, like how much is that factoring into everything?
Absolutely. And to be clear, the video cites these like multiple concerned sources. They even say they've got a second source who talked to the New York Post.
Okay, okay, so multiple sources are
Well,
saying, alleging that Kanye's back on the nitrous oxide.
right. Potentially relapsed, yeah.
Whoa. And the video goes into some pretty specific details. They're saying Kanye was in LA getting some dental work, and that's where the nitrous oxide comes in.
Right, right.
Which makes you wonder, like, is this really standard procedure for dental work? Or was this, something more?
It's a good question. And then on top of that, you have some sources saying that his behavior, like after this alleged nitrous oxide use, that it got even more erratic. But then, like, to make things even more complicated, you've got other information saying that, well, maybe he's using nitrous oxide, like, medicinally.
Hold on. So are we talking about, like, is he self-medicating or is he being prescribed this? What are we saying here?
Well, it's not totally clear from the sources. That's part of the problem, right? We're getting these conflicting accounts, these different perspectives. And then you've got the video throwing in this analogy. They're comparing Kanye on nitrous oxide to, like, a cultural Tourette's experience.
Yeah.
And then they liken his life to, get this, a video game.
Wow, cultural Tourette's. What do they even mean by that?
Yeah, I think they're trying to, I think what they mean is that, Kanye's known for these kind of impulsive statements.
Right, right.
Maybe even like offensive statements. And maybe it's a reaction to, celebrity culture, all this pressure, these expectations that are constantly on him.
Okay, that makes sense. But then you're saying that the nitrous oxide could actually be making this worse.
Well, think about it. Nitrous oxide messes with the neurotransmitters in your brain.
Yeah.
Leads to, short-term memory loss.
Mm-hmm.
Can impact your judgment, your impulse control.
Right, right. Like
Or-
hitting the pause button on rational thinking.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And a former employee of Kanye's is actually claiming that his memory is so bad, like so affected by this, that he might just believe things without even, like, fact-checking them.
Whoa. Wait, are we saying that anyone could just feed Kanye information and he'd just take it as truth?
That's what this former employee seems to be implying.
That's kind of scary.
It is. And then it gets even worse, because the video goes on to make this really serious allegation. They're suggesting that there might be a doctor out there, like, exploiting Kanye's vulnerability for their own financial gain.
Hold up. Exploiting him? Like, how?
Well, Kanye's got immense wealth, huge influence, and that makes him a target, right? Imagine someone in that position, vulnerable, and you've got people around them who might not have the best intentions.
Man, that is heavy. Okay, so we've got this possible relapse, potential memory issues, and now we're talking about exploitation.
Yeah.
This is intense. What about Bianca Censori? Where do things stand with them?
Well, the video says they might be separated, but even the sources they're using admit that Kanye is, stubborn.
Yeah.
So they're not ruling out a reconciliation. I mean, it's a messy situation.
Definitely messy. And the video really gets into these contrasting views about Bianca's role in all this. Is she truly there to support Kanye, or is she, using him for her own ambitions?
It's the question everyone's asking.
Mm-hmm.
And the video does give some specific examples, like they say that Bianca has always wanted fame, recognition. And of course, there's Kanye, who we know has a history of, well, making his partners his muse.
Right, right. That kind of power imbalance you see in so many celebrity relationships.
Exactly. And this is where things get really complicated, right? Because it makes you think about how the legal system, how does it even begin to protect people in these situations?
You're right. You're right. We forget that, behind all the fame and fortune, these are real people.
Absolutely. And the commentator even points out that Bianca, she could have a strong case against Kanye if she plays her cards right. Like if she chooses to present herself as the victim.
Wow. Okay, so we've got this potentially rocky relationship, questions about motives, and then there's Kanye's mental health. The video dances around that topic a little bit.
No, and it's such a sensitive issue, isn't it?
Yeah.
The commentator does acknowledge that Kanye might be struggling with, mental illness.
Hmm.
But then they ask this question, like, does that mean we hold him less accountable for what he does?
It's a good question. It's a question a lot of us are asking.
Yeah, and especially with Kanye, because, on one hand, he's been so open about his struggles,
Mhm.
like both in his music, in his lyrics, and in what he says publicly.
Right. So how much of that, is part of the Kanye persona versus the real person?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's tough.
And it's made even harder by this whole nitrous oxide
Mhm.
thing, right?
Yeah.
Because if his judgment's impaired, if he's not really thinking clearly.
Then how much can we really hold him accountable? But also, you can't just ignore it, right? So,
Right.
so what's the answer here? How do we balance these different perspectives?
Yeah, and this isn't just a theoretical question. It's a real-life issue.
Right.
Because we know people who are struggling, people in our families, our friends.
Yeah.
So what do we do? How do we find that balance between empathy and accountability?
Hmm.
Especially when we're talking about someone like Kanye, who's done some really questionable things. Like the video mentions this example where he wanted to put a swastika on a T-shirt.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's pretty disturbing.
That's really disturbing.
And you have to think about the impact on his family, especially his kids. The commentator makes this really sad point, like Northwest is growing up with all of this, potentially influenced by Bianca Censori, by Kim Kardashian. It makes you think, like, what kind of environment is that for a child?
Yeah, it's hard to imagine that not having some sort of effect.
It's a lot to unpack, for sure.
Mm.
I think this is a situation that touches on so many different things. Mental health, substance use, celebrity culture, the ethics of power.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it raises this question that I don't think any of us have a clear answer to. How do we understand, how do we respond to someone like Kanye West? A brilliant artist, but also a deeply troubled individual.
It's a good question. A really good question. Yeah, it's heavy stuff for sure. And it's easy to get caught up in the gossip, the headlines. But we got to remember, there's a human cost to all of this.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, with Kanye specifically, we're talking about someone who's clearly struggling. Substance use, mental health challenges,
Yeah.
maybe both.
Yeah.
There's this vulnerability there, and it's concerning. It's kind of heartbreaking, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's like watching a train wreck in slow motion.
Oh, wow.
You want to look away, but you can't.
That's a really powerful way to put it. And I think it speaks to, like, our whole relationship with celebrities. We put them on these pedestals,
Hmm.
and we just dissect their every move. And maybe we even project our own stuff onto them, our hopes, our fears.
And with Kanye, it's even more complicated, right? Because he's been so open about his struggles, like in his music, in his interviews.
Right, yeah.
So it's hard to separate the persona from the person.
Totally. He's really blurred those lines. So it makes it that much harder to, analyze his actions objectively.
It's a mess. There's no denying that. But let's try to make some sense of it, right? Based on what we've talked about, what are the key takeaways here?
Well, I think the first thing is we got to acknowledge that there's just a lot of conflicting information out there, especially with this whole nitrous oxide thing. We can't just accept one narrative as the absolute truth.
Right, right. It's all alleged at this point. But even if some of it is true, it makes you wonder about, his inner circle. Are they enabling him? Are they genuinely trying to help?
Yeah.
How can we even tell the difference?
That's a really tough question. It's hard to, to really gauge the dynamics when we're just looking from the outside. But it's a question we have to ask.
Yeah.
And then there's Bianca Censori, right? Is she truly there for him? Or is this, is there an element of, taking advantage of the situation?
It's impossible to know for sure. But, I mean, you can't deny that with Kanye's money, his fame, the potential for exploitation is there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And then, there's the big one, right? His mental health.
Right. And how do we even talk about that responsibly? It's such a delicate issue.
Yeah. We're not doctors, right? We don't have access to his medical records. But we can't just ignore it either.
Exactly. I mean, we have to acknowledge that it could be playing a role in his actions, but at the same time, it doesn't excuse everything, right?
It's like walking a tightrope.
Yeah.
We want to be empathetic, understanding, but we also want to, hold him accountable.
And that's really the challenge here, isn't it? How do we as a society respond to someone like Kanye West? This brilliant artist, but also someone who's clearly troubled.
It doesn't feel like there's an easy answer.
No, I don't think there is.
No.
And I think it's important to remember that this isn't just about Kanye.
Oh, okay.
This is something we all grapple with.
In what way?
Well, think about it. What happens when someone's behavior is influenced by substance use, by a mental health condition? Where do we draw that line
Yeah.
between accountability and compassion?
That's a big question, and it's not one we're going to answer today.
No, but it's something we all need to be thinking about
Mm,
because it's easy to judge, from a distance. But the truth is, we all know someone who's struggling.
right.
It might be a friend, a family member. And it's up to us to approach those situations with empathy, with compassion.
That's a good point. It's a good reminder that we're all human. We all make mistakes. And sometimes those mistakes are just, amplified when you're in the public eye.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why it's so important to be mindful of the stories we consume, the judgments we make. Because behind the headlines, the controversy, there's a real person with real challenges. And while we may not always agree with their actions, we could still choose to approach them with understanding, with a willingness to learn.
That's well said. Yeah. It really makes you think.
It does. And as we kind of wrap up this deep dive
Yeah.
into, Kanye West and everything that's going on, I think it's worth leaving our listeners with something to think about. Like, how do we balance this idea of accountability and compassion,
Hmm.
especially when we're talking about someone whose behavior might be influenced by substances or mental health issues? It's complicated, right? There's no easy answer.
No, definitely not. But it's definitely something worth thinking about. And I think
Yeah.
it pushes us to like look beyond the headlines, and
Absolutely.
see the person.
The human being.
Yeah, the human being behind all of it.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, whether it's Kanye or someone in our own lives, we all deserve some level of understanding,
For sure.
empathy.
Well said.
It's all part of this crazy human experience.
That it is. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everybody.
And we'll see you next time.